Hi, this is Carl again, and this is the third and final part of the discussion on the use of du and sie in German. Now, in parts 1 and 2, what I mentioned was the fact that in English, we can only really ever rely upon the use of the forms of address Mr. or Mrs. plus the surname, and the general choice of words and the style of register in order to lay down the degree of formality which exists between one person and another person or other people. Whereas in German and other European languages, what tends to happen is that not only are the corresponding forms of address used, i.e. Herr and Frau, plus the surname, but also the use of a pronoun which would translate into English as you, that would nevertheless imply that a degree of formality does in fact exist. Now, in Germany, what tends to happen, especially amongst business colleagues who aren't necessarily overly acquainted with one another, who wouldn't class one another as friends, they would speak to one another using Herr and Frau plus the surname, and also the use of sie. Now, I also mentioned in part 2 the fact that a phenomenon has developed which is known as the use of the Christian name plus sie, and this is more than likely come about as a result of post-merger integration projects amongst English-speaking businesses and German-speaking businesses, business takeovers which induce English-speaking people to learn the German language. And given the fact that amongst the Germans themselves, the likelihood would be to hear the use of Herr and Frau plus the surname plus sie, whereas in English-speaking countries, the tendency would be to use very frequently the Christian name amongst business colleagues, regardless of hierarchy, but also by adopting a style of language in English, as I say, a choice of words, a particular choice of words, to give an indication that a degree of formality exists between the business colleagues in question. So the use of the phenomenon sie plus the Christian name is helpful in the fact that it maintains a degree of formality which should rightfully exist between business colleagues, but at the same time the Christian name lessens that degree of formality, tones it down slightly, but obviously not to the detriment that it is lost completely, as it should rightfully be maintained. So the question is, when is it appropriate to switch from Herr and Frau to the Christian name? When is it appropriate to switch from sie to du? Well, in the business scenario, what will tend to happen is the switch from Herr and Frau, or Mr. and Mrs. to the Christian name will occur much sooner than the switch from sie to du. Although I would say that in the business scenario case, the switch from the pronoun sie to the pronoun du would be far less likely, because, as I mentioned in part 1, du tends to be reserved for very close acquaintances and friends and members of the immediate family. So perhaps in that situation it would be best to leave it to the person who is higher than you in the business hierarchy to invite you to address that person using their Christian name. But as I say, it's always better, I think, to retain the pronoun sie to maintain and hold in that degree of formality which should rightfully exist between one business colleague and another, particularly for reasons of hierarchy. But not only that, business colleagues tend, as far as the Germans are concerned, not to regard themselves as very close friends. Now, in a social setting, what will tend to happen is that people now and again will introduce themselves using their Christian name, but obviously if you're not acquainted with that person, then you should use the pronoun sie, unless of course that person were of a similar age to you and you were both, let's say, teenagers or young people as opposed to grown adults. So I'll leave it there, as I may be running out of time, but if you do have any questions, then feel free to drop me a line or an email.